Now we're ready to start working on a generic genitive. But before we do that, I'd like to make a comment. Let's go back to the previous one. Building a grammar, there are two steps to the grammar, the transfer grammar and the synthesizing grammar. The transfer grammar, basically what it's doing is setting features and building structures. And we see that in this verse here. John saw Mary's mother. We see at the last row, the features changed from thing-thing relationship equals unspecified to Saxon genitive by transfer grammar, noun-noun relationships, specific noun-noun relationships. And in the previous video we looked here, the specific noun-noun relationships, kinship right here. So remember, these rules down through noun-noun relationships are executed even before the verse is displayed to us. So already this has set a feature value for us. That last one it's a Saxon genitive. If we rest our cursor right there, thing-thing relationship equals Saxon genitive. Down here, our clitic rule will see that Saxon genitive feature and provide the right morphology. So this rule is applied whenever the thing-thing relationship is set to Saxon genitive. It will insert this apostrophe S clitic. That should be apostrophe S. Okay, so up here we're setting features and building structures. By building structures I mean inserting noun phrases when necessary or verb phrases. We're building the structure. Down here, these rules look at those features, look at that structure, and they provide the right morphology, and then they put the constituents in their proper order. The phrase structure rules put the constituents in their order. So it's sort of a two-step process. So if you can keep that big picture in mind, hopefully that will help as we build grammars. And one more thing here while we're here. If we rest our cursor right here, okay, we'll see the features were changed by those rules we've already looked at. If you look down towards the bottom, positioned by phrase structure rule, noun phrases, generic rule 1, general purpose noun phrase structure rule, constituent 4. Then the next line, positioned by phrase structure rule, clauses, generic rule 1, general purpose clause, phrase structure rule, constituent number 13 for the object. Then we see the same two entries, positioned by phrase structure rule, noun phrases, rule 1, for the NP, constituent number 4, and then constituent number 13. So we see the phrase structure rules are executed twice, and there's a reason for that. I'd like to show you here. Here's a high-level model of the synthesizing grammar. So the feature copying rules are executed, then we come to the spell-out rules, and they're executed, then the clitic rules, then the movement rules, then the phrase structure rules put all of the constituents in their proper order. Then we execute the pronoun rules. These rules can't be executed until after the phrase structure rules have put everything in their proper order. Then we execute the pronoun rules, but then we go back and execute the phrase structure rules again. And the reason for that is because sometimes pronouns need to be positioned differently than their corresponding nouns. So the phrase structure rules are executed twice, and then we come down and execute the morphophonemic rules and the find replace rules. So that's why when you rest your cursor there, you'll see that the phrase structure rules are executed twice. Okay? So let's go ahead and work on this generic genitive. Now the generic genitive marker is sort of unique. Usually when there are 3 question marks down here, we can double click on it and we'll be asked to link that concept to a target language word. But the generic genitive marker is special. It's unique. To link this concept, this generic genitive marker, to we want to link it to a blank space. So we need to right click. Map this concept to target words. Let's click on the blank space. So now we've linked this to a blank space. There aren't question marks here anymore. And that's because, okay, when we double click here, we've already specified that this is Mary and servant. So when Mary is in a generic genitival relationship with servant, we set the NP thing-thing relationship to Saxon genitive. If we go to another sentence that has a generic genitive, like right here. Even though we've linked this to a blank space, there are still 3 question marks down below, and that's because we haven't yet specified the relationship between Turpin and person. If we double-click here now, Turpin and person. Now we can specify this relationship. We would say the people of Turpin. So that would be a Norman genitive. The people of Turpin. And after we do that, now the question marks disappear. So even after your lexicon and grammar are well developed, you'll fairly often see 3 question marks below the generic genitive marker. And that's because you haven't yet specified the relationship between those 2 nouns. Okay? So let's go back to add positions 1-4. John saw Mary's servant. We've specified this relationship. It's Saxon genitive. If we generate this now, okay, John saw servant Mary's. This isn't in the right place, and if we rest our cursor here, you'll see inserted at end by phrase structure rule, noun phrases, generic, rule 1, general purpose noun phrase, phrase structure rule. It was inserted at the end, meaning that phrase structure rule doesn't know where to put this. And we see because NP location and phrase equals unspecified. The reason for that is the rule up here. We looked at this rule in the previous video. This rule specifies the position. So this is a pre-head genitive. This is a post-head genitive. When we come to the generic genitive, it didn't do anything. And the reason for that is because in this document, there is no generic genitive. This table is specifying the specific noun-noun relationships, not the generic one. So in this rule here, we need to specify that this is a pre-head genitive. And now when we generate this verse, John saw Mary's servant, generated text is identical to document's text. So let's save it. And we're done with this verse. Let's go to the next one. John studied Mary's language. Generated text is identical to document's text. Let's save it. Now the reason this was already done, if we initialize again, we've already specified that this is a Saxon genitive. If we double click here, we've already specified for Mary and language that it's a Saxon genitive. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is saying John saw a brick house. If we generate this, John saw bricks a house. Okay, so we need to move bricks so that it precedes house, and we'd rather have just a singular brick there. So this, if we look at this, NP location and phrase is pre-head genitive. Well, okay, that was done for us by this document. Remember when we imported table number 13, made of, we tagged this as right here, made of, and embedded NP precedes the head noun. But we see now that that wasn't really sufficient. We can have a sentence like, John saw Mary's brick house. John saw a big red brick house. So this made of noun phrase, it can co-occur with the possessive noun phrase, like John saw Mary's brick house. So just saying pre-head genitive and post-head genitive, we see now that's no longer sufficient. We need a new value. So let's go back to our rule, and we'll go to made of. Made of. So just setting this to pre-head genitive is no longer sufficient. We need a new value. Let's click on features. And right now the only 2 options are pre-head genitive and post-head genitive. But we can add new values whenever we need to. We can click on feature set, and we'll go to noun phrases, and we'll go to NP location phrase. And let's add a new value. Let's make this specific, like let's call this made of genitive. We can add an example. A more typical example is something like And by putting a comment there, now, when we rest our cursor here, Mary's gold necklace. And whatever we put in bold, see here it's in bold. Okay, so let's choose this value, made of genitive. So now this rule will set the NP location and phrase to made of genitive. Let's go ahead and insert a comment here. And if we generate it now, and we see here, NP location and phrase is made of genitive, but it's still in the wrong place. Now we need to tell our phrase structure rule for noun phrases where to position these made of genitives. So let's go to our noun phrase structure rule. Okay, now we need to ask, where should we put this made of genitive in this noun phrase? Okay, it goes before the head noun, a brick house. It will come after pre-nominal. This pre-head genitive, that's like Mary's. So Mary's 3 good big red brick houses. So we want the noun phrase containing brick to be after the color adjective phrase. So let's click here on that group and we'll insert new constituent. This will be a noun phrase. It will be made of. Click here to insert the name. Let's add an example. Okay, now we need to drag it down. There. And now when we generate this verse, John saw a brick's house. Okay, so getting closer. This isn't a very typical example. A more typical example in the Bible is something like Joseph had a silver cup, or the woman had a gold necklace. But if we do have a brick's house or a stone temple or something, we want this to be singular. So we can do that. Let's go back here for our made of, and let's put a noun in here. And in the output structure, we'll specify that it's singular. John saw a brick house. Generated text is identical to documents text. So let's save it. One more comment before we leave. There's also a set of rules here, noun-noun relationships. There's another set of rules. There's one rule here that you can also use. Like, for example, setting bricks to singular. We could have done that in this rule. Body part, composed of, group, kinship, made of, named, nationality, etc. There's a rule here that you can work on the noun-noun pairs, the noun-noun combinations. So just to keep that in mind, you can do it up here in this rule that was copied from the library, or in this noun-noun relationships rule.